the feast of the fathers, the apostles. Specifically, or representing them, Saint Peter and Saint Paul. If you read the book of Acts, which is the time after the ascension of the Lord, after he fulfilled his plan of salvation of the world, you will find that the book of Acts has two main personalities, Paul and Peter. And the book of Acts focus on these two as examples or role models to the others, or representing the other apostles because they followed the same mission. And if you think about what is just read in the book of Luke, the mission of the Lord Jesus Christ to the 70. So here I'll talk sometime about the fathers, the apostles, this celebration, how to benefit of it, focusing also on the lives of Peter and Paul. The fathers, the apostles in general, were, there are some things that were very clear in their lives. Very clear. Which is, first of all, they loved the Lord. They were attracted to him. They believed on the Lord. They trusted that he is God who came united with flesh for the salvation of the world. So they loved him, they believed on him, they followed him faithfully. They also suffered for him, with this feeling that you suffered for us, we should suffer for you. You loved us, we love you. You suffered for us and carried the cross, and we carry the cross for you. And as you died on our behalf, we also, out of our love and faith, we die. That's why all of them expressed their greatest love to God by being martyred. They were killed for the sake of Christ. This is in general, that is the life of the apostles. Let's focus a little bit on Peter and Paul. They are different in many aspects, and they are similar also in many aspects. But in their differences, God, Jesus Christ, sends us a great message. Let's think about it. First of all, Peter was born in the area of Bethsaida, in the area of Galilee, in Palestine or in Israel, while St. Paul was born in Tarsus of Cilicia or Cilicia, northern than that, maybe in the area of nowadays Lebanon or Asia Minor. So they were different in that. You know that St. Paul had the Roman citizenship, which was like the American citizenship of nowadays, like privileged in a way. While St. Peter was of the Jews of Palestine. They were different in this. The Bible tells us about when John and Peter, they healed the person who was sitting paralyzed on the gate of the temple, that when they were in trial, it is said about them, about John and Peter, they were uneducated, untrained. Peter was a fisherman, as you know, generally of the simple people, simple and poor, and uneducated, while St. Paul was in the opposite, was a very famous man, very, very educated, not only educated and trained, but also he was trained and educated at the feet of one of the great teachers of the Jews of their age or their time, Gamaliel. You see? So, and St. Paul was very versed in the Greek language, in the Jewish language, and in the Roman culture in general. And at the same time, he was a Pharisee, a son of Pharisee, as he says. You know, in a way, he was very educated, very trained, St. Paul, while Peter was the opposite. Peter was married, as you know, and Paul was celibate. That is, you know, all these differences in others tells us that the fold of the Lord contains of all types of people. God invites and calls all types of people, whether Jews, Gentiles, Romans, whatever, you know, God calls all to be saved, whether the very educated or the very illiterate, the very simple and poor and the very rich. God calls all for salvation. Of the differences that happened about St. Peter and St. Paul, that St. Peter was entrusted, according to the book of Galatians, to the letter of St. Paul to the Galatians, Peter was entrusted with the Jews in general, while Paul was entrusted with the Gentiles. Peter was entrusted with the circumcised, while St. Paul was entrusted with the preaching among the uncircumcised or the Gentiles. In a way, you know, but at the same time it is amazing that in spite of this fact that also Peter shared in preaching and teaching the Gentiles. So he preached among the Jews and also among the Gentiles, especially at the end of his life when he went to Rome and preached there and was martyred there. While St. Paul has a burden in his heart to go to the Gentiles everywhere. That's why the Bible tells us that he went from here to there in 3 great missionary journeys, preaching in Antioch, in Jerusalem, in Cyprus, in Asia Minor, in Greece, and even in Rome. As you know, the book of Acts tells us that he was like through a vision, and the Lord said to him, as you preached in my name, with my name in Jerusalem, you will preach in Rome as well. So St. Paul, in the last chapter of the book of Acts, he tells us that he remained 2 years in a house in Rome preaching and teaching about the Lord Christ. In a way, you know, even like St. Paul was entrusted with the Gentiles, he preached among the Jews. And even St. Peter was entrusted with the Jews. He also preached among the Gentiles, and he sent his, especially the first epistles, saying to us that he sends to the Jews in the diaspora, everywhere in the world. So they were different, but you feel that God uses both of them, the uneducated and with the educated, the Jew and the Gentiles, the one who is, entrusted with these preaches in that, no restrictions about these. So the Lord uses all, the celibate and the married. God calls all and loves all. So, and their differences, Peter and Paul are the very prominent apostles, we find that this, completing each other, or in a way, God uses them in all these things. St. Paul has written 14 letters, as you know, and these 14 letters, about 100 chapters, to many nations, to many people, to the Romans, as you know, to the Corinthians, to the Thessalonians and others, So he sent 14 letters, while St. Paul sent 2 letters, 8 chapters, and also with this and that, the Lord did, great effect on everyone by their preachings and by their teachings, by their writings as well. These are some differences, but the differences tell us that the Lord loves every one of us with all our differences, with all our diversities, with all our languages, with all our worldviews or ways of life. Okay? But St. Peter and St. Paul also were, there are many similar things that were in St. Paul and St. Peter. Both of them, as you know, changed their name. The Lord changed their name. So for Peter was previously named Simon, and the Lord changed his name to be Peter, the rock, while God also changed the name of Saul to be Paul, which means that the change of name gives us an idea about the change in life in general. You know that in the baptism, when some change or important change happens in our lives, we get a new name. And when like a deacon or a priest is ordained, he is given a new name, and so on, which tells that you will start a new life, a new way of life. The change of name, like when God changed the name of Abraham to Abraham. The first is the father of a nation, but the second means the father of many nations, So the change of names, God gives us like an idea about the change that should happen when you follow the Lord. Both of them, their names were changed. Simon became Peter, and Saul became Paul. Both of them made many signs and wonders. The book of Acts in chapter 5 says to us that the shadow of St. Peter was casting out demons and healing the sick. And this we pray, as you know, in the liturgy, and you will hear it today. Just the shadow, can you imagine, of Peter was healing the sick and casting out demons, in addition to many wonders and signs and healings, as you know, that he and Peter and John healed the man who was paralyzed on the gate of the temple. Also, St. Paul made many signs and wonders, and the handkerchiefs of Paul was healing the sick. Can you imagine? And the handkerchiefs, these were like, he has a disease, and and drying the problem of the disease with these handkerchiefs, but these handkerchiefs were like healing the sick. This is what the Bible tells us, but amazing, Both of them did many miracles. Both of them raised dead. St. Peter was called in Joppa from Lydda in order to go when Tabitha died, and they called him to pray for her. And when he came, he raised her. He entered the room where she was dead, and the people were crying because she was famous in doing charitable deeds and helping the widows and doing great and good thing among the first community in that city. And so Peter entered and prayed, and he held her by the hand, and he prayed, and she was raised from the dead, and all people were very joyful for these great miracles. Also, Saint Paul, he was preaching in one of the places, and it was like 3 stories and full of people, and he was preaching through a late time at midnight, and Tychicus had fallen from the 3rd floor, and he was dead. But St. Paul went there where the dead man was, and he prayed, and he said to them, and he was raised, and they all rejoiced, So both of them made miracles, both of them raised dead, both of them, Peter and John, Peter and Paul, both of them has a heart to work and to preach and to talk about the Lord Christ. After John and Peter did this miracle of that paralyzed man, they were taken in trial. And the rulers and the archpriests and the leaders said to them, you should not talk about that name, Jesus. Okay? And Saint Peter bravely and with a heart of preaching, he said to them, we ought to obey God rather than men. We cannot stop talking in the trial. So, and you know that the day of Pentecost, St. Peter and the disciples started to preach and teach about the Christ, and 3,000 believed on the Lord in that day, and they were baptized. So Peter has a heart to reach everybody with the message of salvation in Jesus Christ. Also, St. Paul was very famous of that. And even through in the trial before Festus and before Felix, Felix was, and these are like governors and rulers, and they were trying him because he was preaching and teaching about the Lord Christ. And in one of these, which is the trial before Felix, while he was talking about Christ, Felix was feeling very dismayed and afraid when St. Paul started in that trial to talk about the coming judgment, the coming final judgment, and about the purity and self-control. St. Paul was talking about Christ and preaching during the trial. How come you are imprisoned and you will maybe killed because of these trials? I will talk about Christ and many others. And in the epistles he talks many times about many sufferings, whether prisons, whether many times in scourging and prisons and many other things. St. Paul talked much about these experiences and how the love of God, the love of Christ, was filling their heart in a way they could not stop talking about Christ. You see? So, and both of them, St. Peter and St. Paul, reached to the end as martyrs, as you know. So, and tomorrow we celebrate the feast of martyrdom of both St. Peter and St. Paul. And this, is amazing that both of them was sharing the heart, whether they are here or there. And both of them were martyred in Rome in the time of Nero the emperor. Because there was a great persecution at that time, and St. Paul and St. Peter were martyred, as the tradition says, the same day. But as you know that St. Peter was killed or was crucified head down because of his love of Christ, while St. Paul was beheaded on that day. Both of them expressed their love to the Lord, even to the point of death. We love you, and we are ready to suffer, to face trials, to talk about you, whatever the conditions are, and even to the point of death, which is the greatest sign of love. Just think about it, and how when some person loves another person even to the point of death, that is the greatest love. This is what happened with Peter and Paul. Both of them not just loved the Lord or believed on the Lord, but they did their best to reach every person with a message of salvation, doing miracles, doing wonders, raising the dead, and even reaching to the end of their world at that time, going here and there, and they sacrificed their lives willfully, joyfully to the Lord. Great examples of the apostles, or the mission that filled their lives, and through all the differences and similarities, they tell us that the love of Christ, when it fills the heart, it attracts this heart to be faithful, to be ready to sacrifice, to preach, to talk about the Lord Christ, even to death. And this is a great feast in which we celebrate these two apostles. And as you know, from their times, the church, started and propagated and dispersed all over the world, reaching the people everywhere. And we are here, are the results of their work and their sacrifices. And we hope that through their spirit, and the spirit of love, the spirit of faith, the spirit of including everybody, and the spirit of even to die, to live the holy life, and to reach the people with the message of salvation, to dwell in us all, to God the glory forever and ever.